Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike O'Malley here with the Hurricane Outlook and discussion for June 8th, 2020, recorded around 4:26 p.m. Eastern Time. Well, taking a look here at the latest sea surface temperature anomalies last updated yesterday, you notice out here in the ENSO regions, really more in particular the Nino 3.4 region, we continue to see a very significant decline of that region that has been occurring over the last several days or so, and this is likely to continue to go on to weaken here with time. This area will continue to get cooler and cooler as we head throughout the season. We also have this area of pretty anomalous warming out here in the Canaries, east of the Azore Islands, down through the Atlantic Main Development Region. This is setting up, again, the signal is very clear. This area right now is setting up about a half a degree to an order, a degree, maybe 1/2 degree Celsius above the long-term average. And this is pretty significant because this will allow more tropical waves to deal with more energy down here. This is a signaling of a very busy Atlantic hurricane season, and there's no question about it. We've already had 3 named storms this season. Although they have not been from the tropical waves, we still have had 3 named storms, a very busy season already that has been on tabs here really over the last several weeks or so. You can also see here that we do have a little bit of cooler anomalies here in the Gulf of Mexico. That's because of the upwelling and large disturbance area that was Tropical Storm Cristobal, which now has moved inland over the Louisiana region, dumped a tremendous amount of rainfall, storm surge. There was some video coming out of people playing in storm surge. That's a very dangerous situation, and nobody should ever be playing out in the storm surge area. If we take a look here, this is the upper ocean heat content, and this is back from June 2nd. And I want you to take a look, especially out here in this region, and then again out in here, just over the last several days or so, how this area has evolved, especially down here in the southern main development region. Really not typically in the MDR right now, but you do see that some areas now are starting to creep up here towards the MDR, and these areas are pretty warm with deeper upper ocean heat content. That means that we have substantial warm water at depth, which is going to be conducive for tropical cyclones to take advantage of that environment. And you notice, just compared to about a week really ago, that we had not a lot there. I mean, there was some, but now that large expansive area, because of all that warming, we've seen that warmer water now be transferred all the way down at depth. You also notice out here in portions of the southwestern Atlantic, the Bahamas, the Gulf Stream here, just off of the Florida coast. You notice that area too has been warming with the upper ocean heat content going down at a more substantial depth. So we really have to watch this as we now get closer and closer to what will inevitably be a pretty busy peak of our Atlantic. Now, if we take a look here, this is coming off the 850 millibar vorticity from the Central University of Wisconsin-Madison site. This right here, this is our remnants of tropical storm, now tropical depression Cristobal. The National Hurricane Center has issued their last advisory on Cristobal, as it is going to be moving off here towards Iowa and then eventually into Wisconsin here over the next several days. This eventually will wind up over here in Canada, strengthening again as it merges into a non-tropical low-pressure system, a mid-latitude cyclone that will be carrying this system then eventually out here across portions of the northern Atlantic. A very heavy rainfall threat certainly up here, and really all up along this track here that we could see some pretty decent swaths of rainfall from this system. Now, if we take a look here at the vertical wind shear, this is the larger anticyclone that's actually over the system, reducing the vertical wind shear. So that was what's helped yesterday to actually bundle more of the convection around the center, along with less dry air intrusions near the center, allowed it to kind of focus the convective elements closer and closer to that center of low pressure that did help to tighten it up right before landfall. Could have been 60 miles per hour. Officially, it's 50 miles per hour, but there could have been some 60 mile per hour gusts certainly in there, at times. And some of that flight level wind was about 60 to 65 miles per hour, and some of that certainly could have been mixed down in some of the convective elements that came ashore here around Biloxi, Mississippi, Gulfport, Waveland, those areas. You also do notice a little bit of a reduction here in the vertical wind shear across portions of the Caribbean. That's definitely not usual for this time of the year in an average, basically, but with no significant Eastern Pacific developments right now, we don't have this large ripping wind shear across portions of the Caribbean. Now, the Eastern Caribbean out towards the islands and the Atlantic Main Development Region, there's certainly a lot of vertical wind shear. There's a pretty healthy tropical wave in here that is going to be coming across here over the next several days. And this is something to monitor. Some of the modeling is trying to pick up on some development over in this region again as we head throughout the next several weeks. So we really have to watch this as this eventually comes out here into the Caribbean. Again, the upper ocean heat content is certainly more than favorable. The sea surface temperatures are more than favorable. This area is locked and loaded, and it's only a matter of time before something takes advantage of that, I do believe. Again, here's the track of Cristobal. Again, this is expected over the next day or so to eventually become post-tropical here by tomorrow evening, it looks like. And eventually up here in Canada, re-strengthening into an extratropical cyclone. Again, this is not going to be a fully tropical system up here. This is going to be merging up here really tomorrow with this mid-latitude cyclone, and from there, baroclinic processes will help to take over and re-deepen this into a mid-latitude cyclone. Pretty formidable in terms of wind. This could go on to be a pretty big wind producer up here for portions of northern Canada, so certainly something to monitor there. And if we take a look here, this is the Shell Beach predicted water level versus the observed. The predicted water level is down here in the blue. The observed is actually up here in the orange color. And you do notice that we had a fairly substantial storm surge yesterday in Shell Beach, and water levels were pretty high up here. Peaking actually right now, they were peaking at roughly about 6 feet. And the predicted water level at that time by about 3 in the afternoon or so was actually only expected to be roughly about 2 feet or so. So there was significant storm surge that did occur all up and down the Gulf Coast yesterday, just east of where the center made landfall. Was fairly substantial and significant storm surge values that were up in some cases over 6 feet in places. And there was some significant flooding, inundation, some damage. Certainly if this storm would have not made landfall in Mexico and not have had dry air entrainments, this would have been a formidable hurricane and a whole nother story to deal with. So it's very imperative that people along the Gulf Coast, especially, Mississippi, Alabama, really the whole entire Gulf Coast needs to be understanding that the whole Gulf Coast is very susceptible to storm surge. This was a tropical storm of 50, maybe 55 or 60 miles per hour, and that large fetch of onshore winds produced a very significant amount of storm surge for places, upwards of 6 to 6.5 feet of storm surge. Very important to understand that's a very significant amount that you do not want to deal with. 6.5 feet is above almost everyone's head. So I don't care how good of a swimmer you are, you will drown in that. So if you are in a storm surge area, in an evacuation zone that's prone to storm surge, get out. It's imperative. Absolutely imperative that you understand the ramifications of storm surge. It can and will kill you if you aren't careful with it. Now, to the long-awaited 2020 Atlantic hurricane season actual predictions. This was released by me today. It was supposed to come out on June 1st, but we've been very busy here over the last several days and weeks, really. But we have actually raised our numbers now. We are calling now for a 50% chance of an above-average season with a 33% chance of a normal season, 13% chance of a hyperactive season being more than 22 named storms, and a 4% chance of below normal with under 12 named storms. So it's very important to understand this will be a very busy hurricane season. And for our actual cumulative forecast here, we are predicting 16 to 20 named storms. That is up from the previous amount. 7 to 9 hurricanes, which is also above the previous amount. And 3 to 5 major hurricanes, which is also, once again, above the previous amount. The main reasons, and I alluded to this in my tweet earlier, and if you guys aren't following me on there, I will link it in the description. But I did specify that the below normal vertical wind shear across really this whole entire region, along with the sea surface temperatures that are greater than normal across this region, with a phase 1 AMO setting up and a developing La Nina pattern. Those are all key indicators that this will be an above average season, and that is the reason for upping our previous prediction in terms of the amount of named storms and our total cumulative forecast for this year. Now, what's out there right now? Well, we do have a system out to the east of Bermuda. This is not expected to really develop here over the next several days. Only a 10% chance, as it generally heads off towards the north and east here. This will likely, if anything, be a subtropical kind of component, but again, we are not expecting any sort of tropical development or subtropical development for that matter out of that whole situation. Now, this is interesting. This comes from Dr. Michael Ventris, and this is the Day 15 European ECMWF, the VP 200 forecast. This is basically the velocity potential at 200 millibars. And everywhere where you basically see all of this orange and red and yellow, that's mainly the sinking air that suppresses any convection from rising up. But if you look out here towards Africa, there is this area of fairly anomalous rising air. This is the velocity potential. These blue indicators here over Africa, these are suggesting rising air, allowing for deep convection. This is just one of the signs that we look at, and this is out to the next 15 days. This is out towards June 2nd, or June 22nd, rather. And this velocity potential over here and over the western half of Africa and eastern half of Africa is very significant. That means we're going to have more African easterly waves, AEWs, or tropical waves that come off of Africa. And they, don't really stand a very significant chance in the MDR right now, but this gives indication that we are heading towards a very significant base state that is very favorable for tropical development. And this is one of the things that also went into upping our forecast, is the fact that we're just going to have this area just sitting basically right over Africa for the next while. And it doesn't really look to be propagating much. In fact, during the active era, that, being really, 2005, 2004, 2017, 1950, places, years like that we look for analogs, this comes up as a really good analog match. And that is very significant because it has implications down the road. Now, you do look over here, there is a little bit of sinking air. However, again, we have seen that there's, different processes that actually might break down more of the sinking air over the next several weeks. So it's very important to understand that, it's only June 8th right now, and this is forecast for only June 22nd. Typically, June and July are our quietest months in the hurricane season. And then after that, once we start getting out to August, September, October, it's going to be a busy few months. And that's very deeply concerning. And if we take a look here, this is from the weathernerds.org site here. And we'll just put this on the stop for right now. This is our healthy tropical wave that's out here approaching the southern Windward Islands out here. And this is another thing that is very significant. The fact of the matter that we already have some area of energy out here. If we jump back to the 850 vorticity, there's not a lot out here in the 850 vorticity, but it is a little area, so it's interesting to watch. However, there is still some deep vertical wind shear across this region, but generally, for the most part, this is a fairly healthy tropical wave that has come all the way off of Africa and is in the southern main development region at this time. It's very, very, very well organized, but it lacks any decent spin in the atmosphere. But it is something to monitor. We have very significant importance to this, and again, that has a very significant understanding of how things kind of operate there over the next while, really. So it's very important to understand that that has a very significant threat there over the next several days or so. Now, if we take a look here at the GFS forecast, it's the 850 millibar vorticity, or the spin in the atmosphere, about 5,000 feet off the ground. This is the 12Z run valid as of 2 o'clock this afternoon here off the GFS forecast from tropicaltidbits.com. There is tropical depression now, Cristobal, moving inland here over Arkansas, and will continue moving off towards the north here during the next several days or so. And if we look out here, again, we are watching this area of disturbance that the GFS has been consistently forecasting for the last couple of runs down here in the southern Caribbean, moving generally off towards the north. This might be in response to that tropical wave that's generally shifting off there towards the west there over the next several days, which then by hour 198, this is getting very far out there in the wonderland of the GFS forecast. However, it is a sign that the base state is changing across the main development region in the Caribbean. And these are like playing detective, your clues to the game per se. And when you start seeing this, and if more model support can actually catch on to this, there might be a legitimate shot at tropical cyclone genesis somewhere out here in the southern Caribbean within the next week or so. And some of the more prominent meteorologists out there have also noted that this is a legitimate possibility. So this is not just the GFS, making up some bullish, happy hour forecast per se. This is a legitimate concern over the next several weeks, that do we start to see a more favorable base state out here transition to allow something to develop within the next week or so in the Caribbean. That is a possibility. However, the European model, for instance, does not really suggest that out to the next 192 hours. There's virtually nothing, out here at 192. You could argue maybe something out here, but again, the GFS forecast, performed okay with, Cristobal. And it didn't nail it. Neither did the European model. They were both wrong in essence, but they did GFS did handle Cristobal pretty well. Have to hand it to that. And there is some legitimate concern over the next couple of days or so that we might have to watch a system now beginning to enter the picture in the southern Caribbean. So certainly we will be monitoring that here over the next several days or so. However, again, the European suggests that's not going to happen. Now, this is the long-ranging effects here from Tropical Storm Cristobal. Cristobal was a very big storm, and all the way over here in downtown Orlando, Florida, many hundreds of miles away from this tropical storm where it made landfall, there was a tornado in the far, far, far outer bands caused by Tropical Storm Cristobal. That moisture that was coming up, that moisture surge that came up out of the Caribbean, out of the Yucatan into the southern Gulf, and then eventually into Florida as a larger, gyre, the larger kind of envelope of energy. This was the remnant. This is some of the very far bands of Cristobal. And there was an EF1 tornado here in downtown Orlando, Florida on Saturday. This past Saturday, we had an EF1 tornado touchdown. It started out as an EF0 out here in Pine Castle, Florida, moved over towards Edgewood, close to Boone High School over there, close to Orlando Executive Airport, crossed over here on one of the major fare-throughs. I believe that's the 408 over there, or the 408 or the 428. And then it moved over here, weakened once again as it was crossing just towards the west of the downtown Executive Airport, and then eventually dissipated out here. The maximum sustained winds by the Weather Service office in Melbourne was 100 to 105 miles per hour, mainly out in this region, a very densely populated region. Thankfully, no injuries or fatalities were reported, and we actually captured something very significant here. This is the weather station pressure that was from an overnight storm. This was about 8:50, 8:45 to 8:50 in the evening. We had as the far outer bands were still kind of coming in, we had a kind of a pseudo squall that kind of came through, and it went tornado warned and did produce. There was a confirmed report of a tornado on the ground. Literally, as it was passing right over us, it developed actually about less than a half mile from the weather station. This is also located at our house here. And this did pick up on that very pronounced pressure drop. This is starting here at about 8:30 in the evening. The pressure only was about 29.89 inches of mercury, dropped here very substantially to 29.85 as the storm passed over, and that area of rotation that passed over, and then to 8:50 back up to 29.91, and then continued to be 29.91 through about 9 o'clock in the evening. And that's also picked up by the wind direction with time. This is a pseudo-hodograph here. Out here, you're actually looking at the wind direction here based on compass headings. And this starts here at about 8:35. This here is the 9 o'clock time frame. So between 8:35 and 8:40, the wind was out of the east-southeast here. And then eventually at 8:45, you notice that it turned off towards the north and east here. And then eventually, by 9 o'clock, it eventually then turned back off towards the east, and then eventually back towards south and east. So you notice that is cyclonic turning, and that is a very pronounced wind direction change with time. And that was one of the most interesting things that we've been able to capture here so far on the weather station. And this was actually documented in the local storm report from the Weather Service office in Melbourne, and you can find that by going to them. You can also find it by checking the Twitter from them and mine as well to see what I had reached out to them about and everything else like that. So we actually caught something on the weather station, and this was a direct result, or a pseudo-direct result of Tropical Storm Cristobal's far outer effects here all the way in Florida. So certainly a very interesting thing that we were able to capture. Again, this is supported by you guys. This is all supported by you guys. You guys are the ones that make this stuff possible. If it wasn't for you guys here, it really wouldn't be possible. So thank you very much for tuning into today's Hurricane Outlook and discussion. Hope you all have a great rest of your afternoon and evening here, and I'll see you guys back here tomorrow afternoon. Hope you all have a great rest of your day. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll see you back here tomorrow afternoon.